Welcome back. This is the historical figures iceberg, and if you don't know yet, please refer back to the first 3 parts, but in this one, we will again be continuing with tier 3 of the iceberg. Hammurabi. Hammurabi was born over 4,000 years ago in 1810 BCE in a place called Babylon. Now, Babylon wasn't the superpower it would soon become. It was more of an up-and-coming city-state in Mesopotamia, and it was located between the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. His father, Sin-Muballit, was the king of Babylon before him. Therefore, Hammurabi was a prince with ambition in a world where gods were feared and kings were mighty. He would soak up everything he could about ruling, strategy, and how to win over the gods, so that by the time his dad decided to hang up his crown, which was probably due to old age or just the general stresses of ancient king life, Hammurabi was more than ready to take over at around 1792 BCE. Being the king of Babylon was very tough, as you could imagine, and Hammurabi wasn't here to play around. He knew Babylon was surrounded by strong and ambitious neighbors, each trying to carve out their own piece of Mesopotamia. So, Hammurabi got clever. He started making alliances and played nice with other city-states like Larsa and Mari, showing them he could be a friend when needed. But this is where things get interesting. Hammurabi knew that alliances could be temporary, and in 1761 BCE, he went full strategic genius mode and began to conquer his former allies by surprise. He took over Larsa, Elam, and more, expanding Babylon from a single city-state into a sprawling empire. He was essentially unstoppable. One of his most famous moves was writing down laws unprecedented at the time. In 1754 BCE, he unleashed to the world the Code of Hammurabi, a stone pillar engraved with 282 laws. We're talking about everything from serious crimes like murder to rules about who gets to keep a lost donkey. It was the ancient world's big book of rules, and it changed everything. This code didn't just keep people in line, it set the stage for justice and fairness. For example, an eye for an eye wasn't just a saying, it was an actual law. Hammurabi's efforts didn't just stop at ruling and fighting. He also built canals, improved city walls, and made Babylon rich with trade. He ruled for over 40 years, making sure everyone knew he wasn't just any king, he was the king. Later, at around 1750 BCE, after a life full of victories, Hammurabi passed away. While there's nothing on exactly how he died, it's safe to say he left behind some pretty big ancient sandals to fill. So, why is he this high up on the iceberg? I think it's because he basically reshaped what it meant to be the king. The Code of Hammurabi is probably the most famous thing he ever did. It was the first time laws were written down in such detail, setting a standard for future civilizations. People could finally know their rights and what would happen if they broke a rule. This code influenced how justice systems evolved. Even today, we've got rules and laws that help keep things fair. Hammurabi's idea that the government should have set rules everyone can see and follow changed the world for good. His legacy is also about being the king, who showed that power, strategy, and smart governance could turn a small city into the powerhouse of an empire. Babylon thrived long after him, becoming a cultural and intellectual hub, thanks in no part to the foundation Hammurabi laid down. Mary, mother of Jesus. Now we go back to the very beginning with Mary, the mother of Jesus, one of the most famous women in all of history. Ages ago, in a little town called Nazareth, Mary grew up. But even before she was born, there were stories swirling around that she was special. It said her parents, Joachim and Anne, were faithful ones who had been hoping for a child for a very long time. And there she was, Mary, the miracle kid. Fast forward to her teen years, Mary was living her life, helping around the house, probably living quite a normal life, when something crazy happened. One day, an angel named Gabriel allegedly appeared before her. Gabriel had a big announcement. Mary, you're going to have a baby, but not just any baby. This baby will be the Son of God. Now, most people would have freaked out, but Mary was surprisingly quite chill about it. She said something along the lines of, okay, let it be as God wants. And just like that, she became the chosen one. So Mary, now pregnant, went to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who was also expecting a baby. When Mary showed up, Elizabeth's baby, who would grow up to be John the Baptist, leapt in her belly. like he knew something was epic was about to go down. Mary then sang a song of praise called the Magnificent, which would be remembered forever. Skipping ahead a few months, and Mary's about to give birth. But there's a problem. There's a big census happening, so Mary and her soon-to-be husband Joseph have to travel to Bethlehem. The trip was very rough. Dusty roads, donkeys, and when they got there was no room in any inn, so they ended up in a stable, and that's where Jesus was born, surrounded by animals. Mary would always be by Jesus' side, watching him grow from a little boy who got lost in the temple to a man who performed miracles and taught people about love, forgiveness, and hope. Mary was even there when her son was arrested and crucified. But even in that dark time, Mary stayed strong. After Jesus' resurrection, Mary wasn't just remembered as his mother. She became a central figure in the early Christian community. She spent her last years surrounded by people who believed in her son's teachings, and according to some traditions, she was taken up to heaven in what's known as the Assumption. No one really knows how she passed, but the stories say she didn't just fade away. She ran out in a legendary way. Now, why does Mary's story matter so much? Mary wasn't just the mom of Jesus. She became a symbol of hope, faith, and strength for billions of people. First off, her life was set a blueprint for what it means to be devoted and brave in the face of the unknown. She didn't just say yes to raising a kid. She said yes to raising the kid who would change the world forever. Mary's story has been told and retold through centuries, inspiring art, music, and even entire celebrations. Ever heard of the Ave Maria? That's a song that praises her. She also featured in countless paintings, from Michelangelo's Pieta, which shows her holding Jesus at the time he was taken down from the cross, to modern works that showcase her as a symbol of compassion and grace. But Mary's influence isn't just art. For millions of people, she represented love and the power of saying yes. Even when it's scary, in many cultures she's seen as a figure who intercedes for those in need. Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton is one of the most brilliant minds ever. Imagine this, it's Christmas Day in 1642, and there's a baby being born in a tiny farmhouse in Woolsthorpe, England. This baby was Isaac Newton. Fun fact, he was born so small and sickly that people didn't even think he'd survive. Newton's early years weren't exactly the best. His dad passed away before he was born, and when he was 3, his mom remarried and left him to be raised by his grandmother. He also wasn't the best student at first, more into tinkering and making models than paying attention in class. But that changed when he got into the King's School in Grantham. There, he discovered a love for learning, especially when it came to math and science. When Newton was 18, he headed off to Trinity College in Cambridge. Back then, people still believed in a lot of old school theories. But Newton was going to change everything. Enter the plague of 1665. Newton had to go home, but this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. While most people were probably bored out of their minds, Newton spent those years of isolation thinking. A lot. And here's where the famous apple story comes in. Legend has it, one day he saw an apple fall from a tree. Whether it bonked him on the head is up for debate, and started wondering why it fell straight down instead of sideways or up. This moment led to his invention of gravity. He realized there was an invisible force pulling things down to the ground. And just like that, the world would never be the same. Newton didn't just stop there. He started writing a book called Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, or Principia for short, which laid down the laws of motion. These laws explained why everything from cannonballs to planets moved the way they did. One of his most famous is the third law: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Newton would also get into a pretty heated feud with German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz over who invented calculus first, in which they kind of both did, but independently. Newton was so intense about it that he wrote anonymous articles trashing Leibniz. Newton's life wasn't just about formulas and rivalries, though. He also dabbled in alchemy and biblical studies, spending countless hours trying to decode hidden messages in the Bible. Isaac Newton passed away in 1727 at 84 years old, which was super old for the time. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, which was a huge honor. Now, what made Isaac Newton such a big deal? Newton's theories laid the foundation for modern physics, the laws of motion, and universal gravitation. He discovered what became the building blocks for future scientists. You know Albert Einstein? He built on Newton's work and developed his own groundbreaking theories. Without Newton, we wouldn't have Einstein as we know him. Newton's Principia was considered one of the most important scientific books ever written. It changed how people thought about the universe, shifting from the mystical and unknown to a world that could be explained by mathematics and laws. This was a huge turning point, pushing humanity into the Age of Enlightenment, where reason and science started being more prevalent than superstition. Newton's influence didn't just stop at physics. His methods of observation and logical thinking became standard practice, inspiring advances in everything from engineering to astronomy. So today, when you launch a rocket, drive a car, drop a ball, or take a poop, Newton's work is right there, making it all make sense. Ramesses II. Now, let's go back to 3,000 years ago to ancient Egypt, the land of massive pyramids, mysterious tombs, and one of the greatest pharaohs to ever sit on the throne, Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great. Born in 1303 BC, his dad was Pharaoh Seti I, a powerful ruler in his own right. Ramesses II had a childhood filled with training in combat, administration, and all the skills needed to rule one of the most powerful civilizations in the world. By the time he was in his early 20s, Ramesses had already started to show off his military skills. His father made him co-ruler, which was a big deal, basically letting him run things even before Seti passed on. When Seti I died, Ramesses took over as pharaoh at around 1279 BC, and he was ready to make his mark. When I say mark, I mean literally. He put his name on everything: temples, statues, monuments. One of Ramesses' most epic moments came in the form of the Battle of Kadesh. It was 1274 BC, when Ramesses led his army against the Hittites, who were fierce rivals for control over what is now modern-day Syria. The battle was massive, with thousands of chariots across the battlefield. While it didn't end with a clear winner, Ramesses spun the story to make it sound like he was the hero of the day. He had scenes of battle carved into temples, showing him as the fearless warrior who single-handedly turned the tide. Ramesses' reign was a time of incredible construction. He commissioned works like the temples of Abu Simbel, carved into a cliff to show off his power and keep his legacy alive for millennia. It is two giant statues of Ramesses himself sitting outside the entrance, staring down anyone who dared approach. And inside, of course, more statues of Ramesses. Ramesses married Nefertari, his beloved queen, who was known not just for her beauty, but for her smarts and influence. He even built her a grand tomb, the QV66 in the Valley of the Queens, filled with paintings showing their connection. Ramesses ruled for 66 years, which is nearly unheard of. He had more than 100 children, which made his legacy not just a figure of speech, but literal family empire. By the time he passed away in 1213 BC, at 90 years old, his people viewed him as a living god. He was buried in the grand tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a place filled with treasures meant to carry him through to the afterlife. So, why would he be in Tier 3 of the iceberg? Well, his reign was a golden age for Egypt. His military campaigns and peace treaties, like the one with the Hittites, which actually is known as the oldest peace treaty in history, secured Egypt's borders and ensured prosperity. That treaty was so famous that a copy of it hangs on the United Nations today. He also left a cultural legacy that still stands tall. The temples and monuments he built weren't just for show, they were designed to showcase Egypt's strengths and stability. Those towering structures became symbols of power that lasted long after his rule ended. His name became synonymous with the idea of a great ruler. He was so famous that later pharaohs tried to model themselves after him, and his legacy continued in stories, from ancient records to modern films and literature. And you know the story of the biblical Exodus? Many scholars believe that Ramesses II could be the pharaoh in that story. Hatshepsut. Staying in the world of ancient Egypt is Hatshepsut. Born around 1507 BC in ancient Egypt, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Amos. She was surrounded by the wealth and power of the royal court. When Hatshepsut was a teenager, she married her half-brother, Thutmose II, and became queen. But life took a sharp turn when Thutmose II died young, leaving a son behind. Thutmose III, who was just a toddler. Hatshepsut started as regent, which meant she was in charge until little Thutmose II was old enough to rule. But she was so good at leading that she didn't just stop there. A few years in, she declared herself pharaoh, and she went all out, wearing the king's full regalia, including the iconic false beard. This move was a big deal, as women typically didn't rule Egypt, let alone take on the full title and powers of a king. Instead of focusing on war and conquest like other pharaohs, she turned her attention to building Egypt's wealth and stability through trade and construction. One of her most famous achievements was sending on an expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, which is modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The ships came back loaded with treasures like gold, ebony, and myrrh trees, which were planted in the temple gardens. Hatshepsut's legacy is carved into the stones of Egypt. Her most famous building project was the stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a complex built into the cliffs near Luxor. It was designed to celebrate her reign and show the world that she was not just a temporary ruler, but a pharaoh to be remembered. As her reign went on, Thutmose III grew up and started to want a piece of the action. While he didn't openly challenge her during her lifetime, after Hatshepsut's death in 1458 BC, which was probably around 50, something mysterious happened. Her images and statues were smashed, her name chiseled off monuments. Historians think that Thutmose III, or those loyal to him, may have tried to erase her legacy to re-establish the traditional male lines of rulers. By taking the title of pharaoh, she proved that a woman could rule with as much power and authority as any man. Her reign showed that leadership isn't about gender, it's about ability. Hatshepsut's reign marked a time of peace for Egypt. She shifted the focus from military conquest to economic growth and monumental building projects. Those temples and statues were symbols of stability and divine power, showing that Egypt was strong and thriving under her rule. For centuries, her story was almost lost due to the attempts to erase her from history. Traces of her reign survived in the stones and carvings that the chisel wielders missed. When archaeologists began piecing together her story in the late 19th century, they realized that Egypt's history had an epic queen who broke all the norms. And thanks to modern excavations and research, her temple at Deir el-Bahari and other monuments still stand.